In September 2024, while organizing her late grandfather's estate in Charleston, South Carolina, Emma Richardson discovered a family photograph from 1943 that would change everything she thought she knew about her family history. The black and white image showed her great-grandfather, Captain Thomas Richardson, a decorated B-17 bomber pilot, standing with his wife and 3 children in front of their home. The photo appeared completely ordinary, a typical wartime family portrait. But when Emma scanned the image at high resolution and zoomed in to examine details, she noticed something in the background window that made her blood run cold. A face. Not a reflection, not a family member, but a pale, distorted face staring directly at the camera, a face that shouldn't exist. What Emma discovered next would reveal a dark secret her family had kept hidden for 81 years. The following story is a work of supernatural fiction inspired by historical events and family accounts. All characters, names, and supernatural phenomena are entirely fictional creations for entertainment purposes. Emma Richardson had been dreading this task for weeks. Her grandfather, Robert Richardson, had passed away in August 2024 at age 97, leaving behind a house filled with 80 years of accumulated belongings. As the only grandchild living nearby, Emma had volunteered to sort through everything before the estate sale. Most of what she found was unremarkable: old furniture, outdated kitchen appliances, boxes of books and clothing. But in the attic, inside a locked trunk that took her an hour to open, Emma discovered something that caught her attention: a collection of World War II memorabilia belonging to her great-grandfather, Captain Thomas Richardson. Thomas had been a B-17 bomber pilot in the 8th Air Force, stationed in England from 1942 to 1944. Emma knew the basic story. He'd flown 35 combat missions over Germany, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, survived the war, and returned home to Charleston to raise a family. He'd died in 1967, long before Emma was born, but family stories portrayed him as a war hero and devoted father. The trunk contained his uniform, medals, flight logs, and letters he'd written home during the war. At the bottom, wrapped carefully in yellowed tissue paper, was a stack of family photographs from the 1940s. Emma brought the photographs downstairs and began examining them one by one. Most showed typical scenes: Thomas in uniform, his wife Margaret, their 3 children at various ages, holiday celebrations, everyday family moments frozen in black and white. One photograph in particular stood out. It showed the entire Richardson family: Thomas, Margaret, and their 3 children, ages approximately 8, 6, and 4, standing in front of their Charleston home. Thomas wore his Army Air Force's uniform with captain's bars visible. Margaret stood beside him in a floral dress. The 3 children were arranged in front, the oldest holding the youngest's hand. The photo appeared to have been taken in summer 1943, based on a notation on the back: "Summer leave, July 1943, before Tom's return to England." Everything about the image seemed ordinary and wholesome, a family cherishing time together during wartime separation. Emma decided to digitize the photograph to preserve it. She placed it on her flatbed scanner and scanned it at 2,400 dpi, far higher resolution than the original photo would have captured, but useful for examining fine details and preventing further deterioration of the aging print. When the scan completed, Emma opened it in photo editing software and began examining the image on her computer screen. She zoomed in to look at details: her great-grandfather's medals, the children's faces, the house's architecture. Then she noticed something odd in one of the windows behind the family. At normal size, the window appeared to show typical interior darkness, with perhaps a curtain partially visible. But at 400% magnification, Emma could see something that made her hands start trembling. There was a face in the window. Not a reflection of someone standing outside. Not one of the family members accidentally captured in the background. But a face pressed against the glass from inside the house, staring directly at the camera with an expression Emma could only describe as malevolent. The face was pale, unnaturally pale, with dark hollows where the eyes should be. The mouth was open in what looked like a silent scream or laugh. The features were distorted, wrong somehow, as if the face belonged to something that was trying to appear human, but couldn't quite manage it. Emma zoomed in further, to 800% magnification. The face became clearer and more disturbing. She could see details that shouldn't have been visible in a 1943 photograph. The texture of the skin, if it was a skin. The darkness of the eye sockets. The unnatural width of the mouth. And then she noticed something even more unsettling. The face wasn't looking at the camera randomly. Its gaze was directed specifically at one person in the photograph. Her great-grandfather, Captain Thomas Richardson. The thing in the window was staring at him with an intensity that felt almost predatory. Emma spent the rest of the day examining the photograph from every angle, trying to find a rational explanation for the face in the window. She considered every possibility: a trick of light and shadow, accidental double exposure, someone else in the house who'd been forgotten, even modern digital artifacts from the scanning process. None of these explanations fit. The face was too detailed, too deliberately positioned, too present to be accidental or artificial. It was in the original photograph, not something created by scanning or digital manipulation. She called her father, Robert Richardson Jr., Thomas's grandson, and the person who knew the most about family history. "Dad, I'm going through Grandpa's things, and I found some old photos from World War II. There's one from 1943 that has something weird in it. Did you ever hear any strange stories about Great-Grandpa Thomas? Anything unusual about his time during the war?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, her father spoke, his voice careful and measured. "What kind of weird thing are we talking about?" Emma described the face in the window. Another long silence. "Emma, I need you to put that photograph back in the trunk and lock it. Don't look at it anymore. Don't show it to anyone. And definitely don't digitize it or post it anywhere online." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Dad, what's going on? Why are you reacting like this?" Her father sighed deeply. "Because this isn't the first time someone in our family has seen that face. Your grandfather saw it. I saw it once when I was a teenager and foolishly looked through the war trunk against explicit instructions. And now you've seen it. Every generation, someone discovers that photograph and sees what's in the window. And every time, they're told the same thing: lock it away and never speak of it again. But what is it? Whose face is that?" "I don't know whose face it is," her father said quietly. "But I know what it represents. Emma, your great-grandfather Thomas didn't just fight in World War II. Something followed him back from the war. Something that attached itself to him during his time in England. The family has known about it for 80 years, but we don't talk about it. We can't talk about it, because talking about it seems to make it stronger." Emma felt her rational, modern worldview beginning to crack. "Dad, that's insane. You're talking about this like it's some kind of ghost or demon or—" "I'm talking about it like it's something real that affected our family for decades," her father interrupted. "Your great-grandfather Thomas was never the same after the war. He had nightmares every night for 20 years. He saw things in shadows. He refused to be alone in any room with windows. He died young, only 53 years old, from what the death certificate called a heart attack. But your grandfather always believed it was fear that killed him. Fear of whatever was in that window. Fear of whatever had followed him home from the war. Emma looked at her computer screen, at the magnified face staring at her great-grandfather with malicious intensity. What happened to him over there? What did he encounter? That, her father said, is what you need to find out. Because if you've seen the face, it might already be too late. The pattern is always the same. Someone in the family sees the photograph, asks questions, and then things start happening. Objects move, shadows appear where they shouldn't, and the dreams start. Dreams of that face, getting closer every night. Despite her father's warnings, Emma couldn't stop herself from investigating. She needed to understand what had happened to her great-grandfather during the war. What could have caused something supernatural to attach itself to him? She returned to the trunk and carefully examined the other contents. Thomas's flight logs were detailed and methodically kept, documenting every mission he'd flown from June 1942 through August 1944. Most entries were straightforward: mission number, target, duration, crew members, results. But as Emma read through the logs chronologically, she noticed something disturbing. Starting in March 1943, the tone of the entries changed. The earlier missions were described factually and professionally. But from March onward, the handwriting became more erratic, and strange notations began appearing in the margins. March 15, 1943. Mission number 18. Target, Submarine Pens, Lorient, France. Standard entry, but in the margin. Saw something in the clouds, not enemy aircraft. Something else. Crew saw it too, but no one will talk about it. April 10, 1943. Mission number 21. Target, Aircraft Factory, Bremen, Germany. Standard entry, margin note. It followed us again. Closer this time. Johnson, tail gunner, fired at it. Bullets passed through. Captain Reeves told us to never mention what we saw. Official report says we encountered nothing unusual. May 3, 1943. Mission number 24. Target, Industrial Complex, Frankfurt. Standard entry. But the margin note was longer and more disturbing. It's inside the plane now. Not physical, but present. I can feel it watching. The others sense it too. We've stopped talking during missions, because we're all afraid that acknowledging it out loud will make it worse. 3 crews in our squadron have gone missing this month. No wreckage found. I think it took them. Emma felt her hands shaking as she read. Whatever Thomas had encountered wasn't just a one-time sighting. It was something persistent, something that had attached itself to him and his crew over multiple missions. She continued reading. The entries grew increasingly desperate. June 18, 1943. Mission number 27. Target, Railway Junction, Belgium. It spoke to me today. Not out loud, but in my head. It knows my name. It knows about Margaret and the children. It told me it's coming home with me. I can't tell anyone. They'll think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. July 1st, 1943, given 10-day leave, returning to Charleston. I shouldn't go home. It's coming with me. I can feel it. But I need to see my family. If something happens to me on the next mission, I need to say goodbye. Emma realized with horror that this entry was written just before the photograph was taken. Thomas had known something was following him when he returned home on leave in July 1943. He'd known it was coming with him. And somehow, it had manifested in that photograph, visible in the window behind his family. She flipped through the remaining flight logs. After returning from leave in July, Thomas completed 8 more missions between August and September 1943. Then the entries stopped abruptly. No explanation, no final entry, just blank pages for the remaining months of 1943 and all of 1944. Emma checked the military records in the trunk. Thomas's service officially ended in August 1944, when he was granted early discharge for medical reasons. The medical discharge papers were stamped "Psychiatric Evaluation Required" in faded red ink. At the bottom of the trunk, Emma found one more document, a letter from Thomas to Margaret, dated September 15, 1943, never sent. The handwriting was barely legible, the paper stained with what looked like tears or possibly blood. "Margaret, I can't fly anymore. It's in the plane with me every mission. It's in my quarters at night. It's in every shadow and reflection. Command thinks I've cracked under the pressure. And maybe I have. They're sending me home, but I'm bringing it with me. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know what it wants. I only know that seeing me has marked our family somehow. I should never have come home on leave. I should have stayed in England and kept it away from you and the children. God forgive me." Emma needed expert help. She contacted Dr. Helen Crawford, a professor of military history at the College of Charleston, who specialized in World War II aviation and the psychological effects of combat on bomber crews. Dr. Crawford agreed to meet at her office. Emma brought copies of the flight logs, but not the photograph. Something instinctive told her not to show anyone the actual image, and explained what she'd discovered. "What you're describing aligns with documented cases of combat stress and what we'd now call PTSD," Dr. Crawford said, reading through the log entries. Bomber crews in World War II experienced psychological trauma at rates far higher than other military personnel. They flew mission after mission knowing that statistically, they probably wouldn't survive the war. The hallucinations, paranoia, sense of being watched, these are all consistent with severe combat stress. "But what about the multiple crew members seeing the same thing?" Emma asked. "Thomas wrote that his entire crew saw something. That's not individual hallucination. That's shared experience." Dr. Crawford nodded slowly. "There are documented cases of shared psychological phenomena in high-stress military situations. Mass hallucinations, folie à plusieurs, collective delusions. When a group of people are under extreme stress and in constant close proximity, they can begin to share psychological experiences." "What about—" Emma hesitated, knowing how this would sound. "What about supernatural explanations? Are there any historical records of bomber crews encountering something genuinely paranormal during the war?" Dr. Crawford's expression changed subtly. She was quiet for a moment, then stood and closed her office door. "Off the record," she said quietly, "there are files. Classified military documents from World War II that describe encounters that can't be easily explained. Bomber crews reporting entities in the clouds, entire squadrons seeing the same anomalous phenomena, cases of crews going missing under circumstances that don't match any known form of enemy attack. The military categorized these as psychological warfare, collective stress reactions, or simply unexplained phenomena, and buried them in classified archives." She pulled a book from her shelf, a thick academic text on World War II aviation history. From between the pages, she removed several photocopied documents. "These are declassified now, but they're not widely known. They're from a project called Phantom Flight, a classified investigation conducted by the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1943 and 1944 to document and study unexplained encounters reported by bomber crews over Europe. Emma looked at the documents. They were official military reports, stamped and signed, describing incidents that sounded like science fiction. Crews reporting entities that followed their aircraft, phenomena that appeared as faces or figures in clouds, cases of entire crews experiencing shared visions of something they described as the presence or the follower. One report particularly caught Emma's attention. Incident Report Number F-127, July 1943, 379th Bombardment Group, Captain T. Richardson, B-17 pilot, reported persistent encounters with unidentified phenomena during missions beginning March 1943. Richardson described entity as watching presence that manifested visually during missions and appeared to follow aircraft back to base. Multiple crew members corroborated sightings. Psychological evaluation ordered. Entity described as having pale face, dark eyes, unnatural appearance. Richardson granted medical leave July 1943. Recommended for psychiatric evaluation and possible discharge. "That's him," Emma whispered. "That's my great-grandfather." Dr. Crawford nodded grimly. The Phantom Flight files contain over 300 similar reports from 1942 to 1945. Most were officially attributed to combat stress, but the investigators' private notes suggest they believed something genuinely anomalous was occurring. And here's what's most disturbing. In every case where a crew member reported that the entity had attached itself to them or followed them home, that individual either died within 5 years of the war ending or experienced severe psychological deterioration. Thomas died in 1967, Emma said. That's 22 years after the war. He survived longer than 5 years. Did he live well? Dr. Crawford asked gently. Or did he survive in constant fear? Emma thought about her father's description. Nightmares every night for 20 years, seeing things in shadows, refusing to be alone in rooms with windows, dying at 53 from what was officially a heart attack, but might have been something else. No, Emma admitted. He didn't live well. He survived, but something was tormenting him until the day he died. Over the next week, Emma dove deeper into research, cross-referencing the Phantom Flight files with her great-grandfather's specific experiences. What she discovered was a pattern that had been hidden in classified military documents for 80 years. The Phantom Flight investigators had identified 3 phases to these attachments. Phase 1. Initial contact during combat. Crew members report seeing unexplained phenomena during missions. Faces in clouds, entities following aircraft, sense of being watched by something malevolent. These sightings typically began after a crew had flown between 15 and 25 missions, suggesting psychological vulnerability from accumulated stress. Phase 2. Attachment recognition. The entity begins manifesting more directly, appearing inside aircraft, speaking mentally to crew members, demonstrating knowledge of personal details about the crew's lives. The investigators theorized that acknowledgement of the entity's presence somehow strengthened its connection to the individual. Phase 3. Following post-combat. If a crew member with an attachment survived the war and returned home, the entity followed. It manifested in photographs, appeared in reflections and shadows, caused nightmares and psychological deterioration. In documented cases, the entity seemed to feed on fear and acknowledgement. Thomas Richardson's experience fit this pattern perfectly. First contact in March 1943, around his 18th mission. Progressive attachment through repeated encounters. then following him home when he took leave in July 1943, which was when the photograph was taken. But Emma noticed something the military investigators hadn't documented. The pattern continued across generations. She called her father again and asked pointed questions about his childhood. He described growing up in a house where his grandfather, Thomas, was constantly afraid, where shadows seemed darker than they should be, where everyone in the family felt watched. Your grandfather, my father, was affected too, her dad admitted. He never talked about it explicitly, but he had nightmares his entire life. Dreams about a pale face in windows and reflections. And I had them too when I was younger, especially after I saw that photograph when I was 16. The dreams stopped eventually, but I've always felt like something was watching our family, waiting. Has anyone tried to actively confront this thing? Emma asked. To figure out what it wants or how to stop it. Your grandfather tried once, her father said. In 1985, he hired a paranormal investigator, someone who specialized in cases of attachment and haunting. The investigator came to the house, did some kind of investigation, and left after 3 days. Refused payment, refused to explain what he'd found, and told your grandfather that some things are beyond help. He said the attachment was too strong, too old, and that the best thing the family could do was never acknowledge it directly, never speak of it, and hope it would eventually fade. But it hasn't faded, Emma said. It's still there in that photograph, still staring at Thomas. And now I've seen it. And you're telling me I'm going to start having nightmares and feeling watched. I'm telling you that's what happened to everyone else who saw it, her father said quietly. But Emma, you're the first person in our family to actually investigate this properly, to find the military files and understand the pattern. Maybe understanding it gives you power that the rest of us didn't have. Maybe you can find something we missed. Emma looked at her computer screen, where she'd been compiling all her research. Hundreds of pages of documents, reports, testimonies, and historical records. And at the center of it all, that photograph from July 1943, with its terrible face in the window. I need to find other families this happened to, Emma decided. Other crew members from Thomas's squadron. Other people whose relatives had these attachments. If this happened to 300 crews according to the Phantom Flight files, there have to be other families dealing with the same thing. Maybe together we can figure out what these entities are and how to break the attachments. Emma created a private online forum titled Phantom Flight Families and began reaching out to descendants of the crew members mentioned in the declassified reports. Within 2 months, she'd connected with 47 families whose relatives had reported similar experiences during World War II. The stories were remarkably consistent. David Martinez from Arizona. My grandfather flew B-24s in the Pacific. He came home with something attached to him. We have a photograph from 1944 where you can see a face in the water reflection behind him. Same pale face, same dark eyes. He killed himself in 1952. Family always said it was PTSD, but his suicide note said, "It won't stop watching me. I can't live like this anymore." Rebecca Chen from California. My great-uncle was a ball turret gunner. He survived the war but died in 1950 in an asylum. Before he lost his mind completely, he drew hundreds of sketches of the same face, pale, distorted, watching. I have one of the drawings. It looks exactly like what you're describing. James O'Connor from Massachusetts. My grandfather's B-17 crew had 10 men. 7 survived the war. All 7 died before 1955. Car accidents, suicides, heart attacks, 1 drowning. My family always thought it was coincidence or undiagnosed PTSD. But my grandmother told me before she died that my grandfather had seen something during the war, something that followed him home, and he knew it would eventually kill him. Pattern after pattern emerged. Emma compiled the data and found something statistically impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Crew members who reported these attachments in the Phantom flight files died an average of 8.3 years after the war ended, regardless of age or health status. The general population of World War II veterans who didn't report these experiences lived an average of 35+ years post-war. Something was killing these men. Not immediately, not dramatically, but progressively, as if whatever had attached to them was slowly draining their life force or driving them to death through psychological torture. Emma organized a video conference with 20 of the family members. They shared photographs, documents, stories passed down through generations, and they all shared one common element: the face. Every family had seen it. In photographs, in reflections, in dreams. The same pale, distorted face with dark eye sockets and an unnaturally wide mouth. Different families from different parts of the country who had never met, all describing identical features. One woman, Patricia Goldstein, shared something particularly disturbing. My grandfather was a navigator on a B-17. He survived the war but became increasingly paranoid in the 1950s. Before he died in 1956, he wrote a journal trying to understand what had happened to him. I found it in his belongings after my father died. In the journal, my grandfather theorized that these entities weren't random. He believed they were attracted to specific individuals, people who had psychic sensitivity or some kind of spiritual openness that made them vulnerable to attachment. She held up pages from the journal, covered in cramped handwriting. He wrote that he and some of the other affected crew members had experimented with Ouija boards and seances before the war, just fooling around, not taking it seriously. He wondered if that had opened a door somehow, made them visible to things that most people couldn't see. And once those things noticed them, they never let go. Emma felt a chill. Did Thomas, my great-grandfather, have any interest in spiritualism or paranormal activity before the war? She called her father immediately. Dad, I need you to tell me, did great-grandpa Thomas ever mess around with Ouija boards or seances or anything like that? Long pause. How did you know that? Yes, according to family stories, Thomas and some friends experimented with spiritualism in the late 1930s. It was fashionable then. Why? Emma explained Patricia's theory. Her father was silent for a moment. Emma, you need to stop this investigation. You're digging into something that might notice you digging. Emma should have listened to her father's warning. 3 days after the video conference, the dreams started. The first night, she dreamed she was in a B-17 bomber flying over Germany. She could hear the engines roaring, feel the vibration of the aircraft, smell the distinctive odor of fuel and metal. She looked around the cramped interior and saw crew members in period-correct uniforms, faces tense with concentration. Then she noticed something in the shadows at the back of the plane. A figure that shouldn't be there. As she watched, it moved forward, becoming clearer. The pale face from the photograph, dark eye sockets, mouth open in a soundless laugh. It looked directly at her and spoke, though its lips didn't move. You found me. Now I found you. Emma woke gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat. She checked the time. 3:17 a.m. She got up, drank some water, tried to calm down. It was just a nightmare triggered by stress and her recent research. She went back to bed. The moment she fell asleep, she was back in the bomber. The face was closer now, just a few feet away. You wanted to understand. I'll show you. I'll show you everything. Emma woke again, 3:17 a.m. She'd been asleep for less than a minute by the clock, but the dream had felt like hours. This pattern continued for 6 nights. Every time she fell asleep, she immediately returned to the bomber. The face grew closer each time, more detailed, more present. And it spoke to her, telling her things about the war, about the men who had died, about what it was and what it wanted. By the 6th night, Emma was terrified to sleep. She'd called her father, who confirmed this matched what had happened to him and her grandfather. The dreams don't stop, he told her. They continue until either you stop investigating or something worse happens. What's worse? Emma asked. It stops appearing only in dreams. It starts appearing when you're awake, in reflections, in shadows, in photographs you take. Once it fully manifests in your waking life, you're as attached as the original crew members were. And then you're marked, just like Thomas was marked. That night, despite her terror, Emma forced herself to sleep. She needed to understand what this entity wanted, what it was trying to communicate. When the dream started, the same B-17, the same crew, the same approaching face, she didn't run or try to wake up. She confronted it. "What are you?" she demanded. "What do you want?" The face smiled, an expression that looked wrong on its distorted features. "I am hunger. I am the shadow that feeds on fear and death. Your great-grandfather saw me because he opened a door he shouldn't have opened. He and others like him were playing with forces they didn't understand, calling to things beyond their world." I answered, and once I attached to him, I found something delicious. The taste of a soul marked by war, by killing, by the darkness that combat creates in the human spirit. Why didn't you just kill him? Why torture him for years? Because fear is more nourishing than death. A quick death feeds me for a moment. Years of fear, decades of being watched and hunted and slowly drained, that feeds me for a lifetime. Your great-grandfather sustained me for 22 years. Your grandfather sustained me for another 40. And now you've offered yourself by investigating, by acknowledging my presence, by looking directly at my face in that photograph. You're mine now, Emma Richardson, just like Thomas was mine. Emma woke screaming, but this time when she opened her eyes, she wasn't alone in her bedroom. In the corner, barely visible in the darkness, something pale was watching her. Emma didn't sleep for 3 days. She kept every light in her apartment turned on, drank coffee constantly, and spent hours researching methods of breaking supernatural attachments. The entity appeared intermittently, in reflections, in the corners of her vision, in photographs she took with her phone. It was manifesting in her waking life exactly as her father had warned. On the 4th day, delirious from exhaustion and fear, Emma received an unexpected email from an address she didn't recognize. Doctoress Winters at SecureNet. Encrypted. The message was brief. I know what you're dealing with. I can help. Meet me at the location below. Come alone. Come during daylight. And bring the photograph. Emma should have been more cautious, should have questioned who this person was and how they knew about her situation. But she was desperate. The address was a small church in rural South Carolina, about 2 hours from Charleston. She arrived at 2 p.m. on a bright October afternoon. An elderly woman was waiting in the church parking lot. She looked to be in her 80s, with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Emma Richardson," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Dr. Susan Winters. I'm the paranormal investigator your grandfather hired in 1985. I told him then that his situation was hopeless, that the attachment was too strong. I was wrong. I was a coward. I ran because I was afraid of what I'd have to do to help him. I've regretted that decision for 40 years. She gestured toward the church. "Come inside. We don't have much time. Once an entity begins manifesting in waking life, you have approximately 72 hours before the attachment becomes permanent and irreversible. You've already lost 3 days to fear. That gives us 24 hours, maybe less." Inside the church, Dr. Winters had prepared what looked like a ritual space. Candles, salt circles, various religious symbols from multiple traditions. And in the center, a large mirror covered with a black cloth. "The entity attached to your family is what we call a fear feeder," Dr. Winters explained. "It's parasitic. It exists in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond death. During the war, when so much death and fear saturated Europe, these things found it easier to cross over, to attach to individuals who were already spiritually vulnerable. Your great-grandfather's experiments with spiritualism before the war made him visible to it. His combat experiences made him delicious to it." She placed the 1943 photograph in the center of the salt circle. "This photograph is an anchor point, the moment when the entity fully attached to your family line. It's in the background of this image because it was there, present and watching, when the photo was taken. Every family member who has seen this photograph has essentially made eye contact with the entity across time, which strengthens its ability to attach to them." "How do we break the attachment?" Emma asked. Dr. Winters looked grim. "The only way to break a fear feeder attachment is to stop feeding it. These entities sustain themselves on fear and acknowledgement. Your great-grandfather fed it with 22 years of terror. Your grandfather fed it for another 40 years. You've been feeding it for 2 weeks. To break the attachment, you have to confront it without fear, deny it acknowledgement, and sever the anchor point." She uncovered the mirror. "The entity can manifest through reflective surfaces because it exists partially in reflected reality, the space between what is real and what is perceived. We're going to use this mirror to bring it fully into manifestation, not as a shadow or a dream, but as a complete presence. And then you're going to banish it by destroying the photograph and refusing to fear it." Dr. Winters began the ritual at exactly 3:17 a.m., the time Emma had been waking from nightmares every night. "Entities that feed on patterns become strongest during their preferred times," she explained. "We're going to use that against it. It will expect you to be afraid at 3:17 a.m. Instead, you're going to attack." The ritual was complex, involving prayers in languages Emma didn't recognize, burning sage and other herbs, and the precise arrangement of religious symbols around the mirror and photograph. Dr. Winters worked methodically, explaining each step. "When I remove the cloth from the mirror, the entity will be compelled to manifest fully. It won't be able to resist because it's been feeding on your fear for 2 weeks, and it's hungry for more. The mirror will trap it momentarily, just long enough for you to destroy the photograph, which is its anchor to your family." "What happens after I destroy the photo?" Emma asked. "If this works, the entity will lose its connection to your bloodline. It won't be able to follow you or any future descendants. It will return to whatever space it came from. But Emma, you must understand, the moment it manifests, every instinct in your body will scream at you to run. Its appearance is designed to trigger primal terror. You cannot run. You cannot show fear. You must walk directly to the photograph, pick it up, and burn it in the candle flame while stating your intention to sever the attachment. Can you do that? Emma's hands were shaking, but she nodded. I can do it. I have to do it. This thing has tortured my family for 3 generations. It ends tonight. At exactly 3:17 a.m., Dr. Winters pulled the cloth from the mirror. For a moment, nothing happened. Emma stared at the mirror's surface, seeing only her own reflection and the candle-lit church around her. Then the reflection began to change. The church in the mirror darkened. Shadows deepened unnaturally. And then, behind Emma's reflected image, something appeared. The pale face from the photograph, but now life-sized, detailed, and moving. It emerged from the darkness of the mirrored church like something rising from deep water. Emma had seen this face in dreams, in photographs, in glimpses at the edges of her vision. But seeing it fully manifested, solid and present, was more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. The face was wrong in ways that violated natural law, proportions that didn't quite fit human anatomy, skin that looked more like parchment stretched over something skeletal, eyes that were not holes, but rather voids that seemed to pull at her consciousness. The mouth opened, wider than should be possible, and a voice that was not quite sound, but rather vibration directly in her mind spoke. Emma Richardson. You brought me here. You acknowledged me. You are mine now, just as Thomas was mine, just as Robert was mine. You will feed me until you die, and then I will move to the next generation. This is the debt your family owes for the door they opened. Every survival instinct Emma possessed screamed at her to run, to flee the church and never look back. Her legs trembled. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. Sweat poured down her face despite the cool October night. But she thought of her great-grandfather Thomas, who had lived 22 years in constant terror of this thing. She thought of her grandfather, who had nightmares his entire life. She thought of her father, who still felt watched even now. And she thought of her future children, who would inherit this attachment if she didn't end it tonight. Emma forced herself to move, not away from the mirror, but toward the photograph at the center of the salt circle. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. The entity in the mirror spoke continuously, its voice a stream of threats and promises of suffering. You cannot break what was made 80 years ago. Thomas opened the door. The door cannot be closed. I will follow you forever. I will be in every reflection, every shadow, every dream. You will die screaming like... Emma picked up the photograph. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The entity's voice rose to a shriek that felt like knives in her mind. In the mirror, it pressed against the glass as if trying to break through into physical reality. You cannot! The attachment is complete. You are mine. Emma held the photograph over the candle flame. No, she said, her voice breaking but determined. You are nothing. You're a parasite that feeds on fear, and I refuse to feed you anymore. My great-grandfather didn't understand what he was dealing with. I do. You have no power except what we give you through our fear. And I'm done being afraid. The photograph caught fire. The old paper burned quickly, curling and blackening. Emma held it as long as she could before dropping the flaming remnants into a metal bowl Dr. Winters had prepared. The entity in the mirror screamed, a sound that was felt rather than heard, a vibration that shook the church and made the candles flicker. Its form distorted, stretching and warping, as if being pulled backward through the mirror's surface. This isn't over, The debt remains. The door stays open. But its voice was fading, becoming distant. Emma watched as the pale face was dragged backward into darkness, its features becoming less distinct, less present. Within seconds, the mirror showed only normal reflections again. Emma, Dr. Winters, the candlelit church, nothing more. Emma collapsed to her knees, exhausted and shaking. Dr. Winters put a hand on her shoulder. It's done. The anchor is destroyed. The attachment is broken. It cannot follow you anymore. 3 months after the ritual, Emma sat in her apartment, reviewing everything that had happened. The nightmares had stopped the night she burned the photograph. The sense of being watched had faded gradually over the following weeks. The entity had not reappeared in mirrors, shadows, or dreams. Dr. Winters had explained that destroying the photograph severed the entity's connections to the Richardson family line. But it hadn't destroyed the entity itself. These things are ancient and persistent, she'd said. It still exists somewhere in the spaces between worlds. But without an anchor point, and without a fear source to feed on, it can't maintain presence in our reality. It's gone back to whatever realm it came from. Emma had contacted all the families from the Phantom Flight Support Group, sharing what she'd learned and how the attachment had been broken. Several families decided to attempt similar rituals with their own anchor photographs and objects. Emma heard that at least a dozen had reported success, finally freeing their families from attachments that had plagued them for 3 generations. But not all the news was positive. Some families reported that their attempts had failed, or worse, had seemed to strengthen the entity's connections. Dr. Winters explained that each case was slightly different. Each entity had different characteristics, and what worked for one attachment might not work for another. The most important factor, Dr. Winters told Emma during a follow-up call, is the mindset of the person performing the banishment. Your great-grandfather couldn't do it because the attachment happened during a war, when he was already traumatized and psychologically vulnerable. Your grandfather couldn't do it because he'd lived with it his entire life and didn't believe it could be defeated. But you investigated it, understood it, and most importantly, you stopped fearing it long enough to take action. Fear is what gives these entities power. Knowledge and courage are what break that power. Emma wrote a detailed account of her experience and submitted it to several paranormal research journals. Most rejected it as unprovable anecdote, but one small academic publication specialized in unexplained phenomena accepted it. The article was titled "Breaking Transgenerational Supernatural Attachments," a case study of World War II Phantom Flight entity. She received dozens of emails from people who'd read the article and recognized similar patterns in their own families. Not all were connected to World War II. Some attachments dated back to other wars, other traumas, other moments when people had inadvertently opened doors to things beyond normal reality. Emma became an informal advisor to people dealing with these situations, always emphasizing Dr. Winters' key insight. These entities feed on fear and acknowledgement, and starving them of both is the only way to break free. Her father called one evening, his voice lighter than she'd heard in years. "I haven't had a nightmare in 3 months," he said. "For the first time since I was a child, I don't feel watched." Emma, you did something I never thought was possible. You ended something that's haunted our family since 1943. Your great-grandfather would be proud. Hell, I'm proud of you. Emma looked at the empty space on her wall, where she'd briefly hung her great-grandfather's other war photographs, before putting them in storage. The images were innocent now, just historical documents of a man who'd served his country and come home to his family. But she kept one item. Dr. Winters had photographed the moment when the entity vanished from the mirror during the ritual. The image showed the pale face distorting and fading, pulled back into darkness. Emma kept this photograph not as a memento, but as a reminder that sometimes the things we inherit from previous generations can be confronted, understood, and ultimately defeated. The Richardson family's debt opened when Thomas experimented with spiritualism in the 1930s and sealed when something attached to him during World War II was finally paid in full. The door was closed. The entity was gone. And for the first time in 81 years, the family was free. The 1943 photograph of Captain Thomas Richardson and his family seemed completely ordinary until high-resolution scanning revealed a pale, distorted face watching from a window, a face that represented an entity that had haunted the Richardson family for 3 generations. What began as a simple digitization project uncovered a dark secret: that Thomas had inadvertently opened a door to something malevolent during wartime, creating an attachment that fed on fear and passed through his bloodline for 81 years. Emma Richardson's courage to confront and banish this entity proved that even supernatural inheritances can be broken if we're willing to face them without fear and destroy the anchors that bind them to us.